So the Intel drama is here to stay, and it's going to be here for a while. But I've been getting a lot of messages and reading a lot of forum posts and sort of anonymously joined a lot of PC enthusiast groups just to kind of see what people are saying. And overwhelmingly, there's this notion of not being able to tell whether or not your CPU has degraded or not. We're going to talk about that today, and I'm going to show you some tests that you can run to sort of rule out whether or not your CPU has like advanced degraded and is ready for RMA, or whether or not your CPU is still stable with lots and lots of life ahead of it so that you can kind of figure out where you might be in the whole drama scale of things. So anyway, sit back. I'll talk about free software that doesn't cost you any money to be able to do these tests, and hopefully this will give you some peace of mind to determine whether or not you should be RMAing right now, or hoping that a BIOS update with the microcode fixes is enough to hopefully stop the problem for you. Today's video is brought to you by the new, really super cool JSUSense Melty connector shirt, paying tribute to one of the best designs that's clearly ever existed. And if you don't like the Vaporwave colors, we've got our OG gray and red colors available now. So get yours by following the link in the description below.
Nice.
Ow, I have a thigh cramp. I want to talk about degradation real quick though, because I did get on the phone with Falcon Northwest. Falcon Northwest is very close with Intel in that they have a lot of discussions with them directly. There's Kelt, the owner of Falcon Northwest. He's a nerd, has been for over 30 years, delving deep into this sort of stuff and understands the architectures and really has helped get to the bottom of what's been going on. So he's a source that I trust when it comes to some of this info. And one thing that really needs to sort of be driven home is the fact that every single CPU degrades. Every single processor, yours, mine, everyone in here, AMD's, Intel's, ARM's, Qualcomm's, they all degrade. The thing is, they're built with a certain amount of headroom into them so that the degradation over time, at least, is in theory supposed to like the performance that's advertised is expected to last the life cycle of the CPU's lifespan. Now the thing is, nobody ever advertises how long a CPU is expected to last because there's many factors that would determine how fast or how slow a CPU degrades. Unfortunately, with all of the microcode discussion and the multiple points of accelerated degradation that's been taking place, whether it be Unfortunately, there's multiple ways that CPUs for 13th to 14th gen have been sort of advanced degrading, whether it be Intel's own fault with microcode stuff, or Intel's own fault with not reining in their motherboard manufacturers or partners that are just going wild, wild west with the voltages and just ignoring VRTT altogether, or just applying their own ridiculous load line calibrations. ASUS, I'm looking at you, causing extreme heat and extreme advanced like electron migration by pumping so much voltage in there unnecessarily. Or whether it be you got a CPU from the 2023 era when there was oxidation known to have apparently affected X amount of CPUs that has yet to be disclosed on how many have actually been affected. So there's multiple things happening here. So whether or not you fall under one of those categories, the first thing you should do, and we've talked about this a million times already, is upgrade your BIOS, especially if you have never touched the BIOS from when you took your motherboard out of the box. Pretty much any motherboard you get off the shelf today is behind on the BIOS. I bet no motherboards that are on the shelves currently right now have the latest microcode BIOS. It's just been too soon between when the BIOS launched for ASUS and MSI and the manufacturing delay process for manufacturing, boxing, shipping, inventorying, shipping to the retailers, e-tailers, and getting them on shelves. So everybody who's built a motherboard or built a system prior to August, pretty much even today, if you went out and bought the stuff today, you need to update your BIOS. That's first and foremost. That doesn't guarantee though that your CPU is not necessarily going to still have some problems, because as I just mentioned, it's being discovered that even with the latest microcode, it's still on the motherboard manufacturer's responsibility to make sure that all the VRTT or the voltage regulation and thermal throttling tables are taken into account and not pumping too much voltage in. Also too, MSI had a stint there where their load line calibration was actually the opposite, in that it was causing severe undervolting of the CPU. So the crashing and stuff that people were experiencing was actually the opposite of degradation. It didn't have enough voltage supplied to it to even supply its stock boost clocks and such. It was going from something like 0.7 to 0.8 volts under load, which is not enough voltage to even come close to giving the advertised boost speeds and stuff. So the CPU would try and boost, and then the motherboard and VRMs wouldn't provide enough power, and then it would crash, looking like a degradation problem when it was actually the opposite. Anyway, assuming now you've updated your BIOS, you've got the latest microcode, hopefully your motherboard manufacturers, those that haven't released theirs yet, will get on that soon. That's currently the 0x129 microcode is what we're looking for. We are now going to talk about free software that you can download and install and try and run to see if your CPU crashes. Also, too, one other thing I have to point out is it's also not recommended, it's kind of required to do these tests at XMP off. You do not want XMP turned on. You do not want to add any sort of additional point of potential crashing because XMP is not always stable. XMP, especially if you're running like 7,400 megahertz DIMMs or 8,000 megahertz DIMMs, is not guaranteed to be stable on all CPUs. Also, if you're populating all 4 RAM slots in your board, it's recommended to maybe take out 2 of those sticks, disable XMP to run the most stable config we can think of. We want to make sure all the stress is on the CPU. Nothing else could be causing potential blue screens or crashing in our system. Because how would you really know the difference is your RAM's too fast or heck, even your RAM's faulty versus your CPU? So I actually need to go and disable XMP right now because I haven't done that yet. Remember what I was just saying about MSI boards sometimes undervolting? This is actually not bad, but I'm in BIOS right now, which is actually a low load state, which would actually push the clocks up and the voltage up. It's actually only at 0.890 volts, but still under load. I know it passes because we ran all of our CPU tests on this board with this BIOS. So we know we're good. We know the load line is probably going to somewhere where it needs to be. But anyway, XMP profile is here. Whoops, I'm just gonna uncheck that, boot, and we're basically just disabling XMP. So we wanna make sure XMP is off, that's first and foremost. Okay, so all of this software I'm showing you is free. This is actually Hardware Info 64. You guys have been yelling at me for years to use it. I started using it, actually really love it, and I might actually do a video about it here. But anyway, this is a free piece of monitoring software so that if you want, this is not a prerequisite, but if you want to, you can keep an eye on what your voltages are bursting to, what your single core to multi-core workload burst looks like on voltage and stuff, your temperatures and all that. But here's the thing. If you're at stock, you're not doing any sort of overclocking to your CPU, you should not be seeing temperatures go crazy, especially if you are running an i9 processor and you're at the 253 watt, or even an i7 with a 253 watt profile for like 13700, 14700Ks. This just allows you to keep an eye on some things. So you can see what our package power is right here. I've got a lot of it hidden depending on what I'm doing. I don't want all the info, so I'll turn on and off things. Just look up your CPU and see what your TDP should be and then make sure it's not exceeding that. Then you'll know if it is, your motherboard is to blame for that and you need to make sure that your motherboard BIOS is updated to stop it. Also, we can see our frequencies and stuff right here, and then we can see our vid, our SA vid and Uncore vid right there. We're gonna be using a few tests here. Intel burn test, it's actually an old test, but what's funny here is that most of the degraded CPUs are not actually showing their failures or their degradation in multi-threaded workloads. They're showing it mostly in single-threaded or maybe 1 or 2 thread workloads because that's where the frequency is going to its highest. As you can see, my frequency is pegged, right, 5985 on these 2 cores because those are the 2 best cores, so they're the ones that are getting me up to the 6 gigahertz boost. Technically it's 5.8 gigahertz, but we can get a little spiky workload. Same thing up here. That's just showing me the max core clock. So 6 gigahertz is where the CPU will go on single load. That also requires a significant amount of voltage to make that happen. So if there's degradation, it could happen in those bursty workloads, not just a sustained hard workload. So this is why our test is going to show us a bunch of different things here. But the easier to run test, the more bursty the processor and the cores can actually go, which is where the problem can start to really show itself. This is why I say this is kind of an ongoing problem with Intel because of the fact that we're still not 100% sure exactly what is happening. And the way that the CPUs degrade is not consistent. Some degrade faster than others because what motherboard combo was it in? What workloads were you doing? What was your ambient temperature? How hot was a CPU allowed to get? Those CPUs that are running higher voltages with really big coolers keeping the temps down will degrade slower than those that have the same voltage with lesser quality coolers allowing the temperature to reach TJ max because we know as the temperature increases, higher temperature actually with higher voltage leads to that electron migration faster than colder CPUs with higher voltage. So there's so many different like combos and variations of the way these CPUs are being loaded up. It's very difficult to kind of say, hey, this is exactly what happened and this is what caused it. So first thing we're gonna do right now is I'm just gonna start Intel burn test. How long you wanna run these tests is kind of up to you. Right now it's set to run 10 times stress level standard. We're just gonna leave it out of the box settings for all threads. And then we're gonna hit start. The reason why the fire is burning right there is not, well, I mean, it is kind of putting your CPU under load. I mean, we spiked to 1.469 right there, 1.474, 1.499 is the highest. But under load right now, you see we're jumping around 1.3s to 1.4s. which is a lot, but as you can see for the core temperatures, right, 58C, it's not putting that much stress on the CPU right now. But we could set this thing to run 1,000 times or 100 times or whatever we want and keep it going. But the fire is there just so that you can see the fire will stop moving if your CPU crashed. So you may not get an error that pops up on the screen. That's why it's called a freeze test. Anyway, this is just getting us ROPS or GFLOPS right here and a very big result number in the amount of, I think that's math. I'm not entirely sure what it's doing. And it's saying how long it's taken to do it. But again, you can let this thing run for a long time if you want. This used to be like the preferred stability test for a long time. The thing is, this is a very outdated tool, and it's something that allows us to be able to just start light on the CPU. So my recommendation, success, your system was able to maintain stability. So I would recommend actually setting this to like 100 and then letting it complete all 100 tests. And we're gonna do that right now. All right, so it's been running for a while. It hasn't done all 100. It's only probably done like 20 of them. And that's good enough for right now because we need to move on. We have a video to make. I can't take 5 hours to make this video. We'll do the testing and stuff later. In fact, I know it's a good solid CPU, but who knows, maybe it was solid and we're gonna find out. So the other thing I would do here before we move on is I would move this down to a single thread. The reason why I would go down to single thread, I've already explained. It changes the way that the CPU reacts and the voltage is based on a single core workload versus a multi-core workload. I would run that test for maybe not necessarily 100 times unless you have hours to set aside and let it go, because it's on this CPU, it's taking an average of 16.5 seconds to get that test done. So that's gonna be 1,650 seconds. Okay, so next up is Cinebench R15. I think BuildZoid was even showing R15 runs were unstable for some of his CPUs. So that's one of the reasons why we're using it. Again, an older test that will run super, super fast. So we want to go ahead and do, let's see, advanced benchmark so we can do single core and multi-core. So that's what we want to make sure we're running. So CPU is all cores. CPU single core is just that, single cores. So let's just go ahead and loop a few times a multi-core. I forgot what this scene looked like, it's been so long. This is gonna destroy this chart. Yeah, so we could just sit here and run it multiple times. Unfortunately, R15 doesn't have a timer built in. That's a R23, R24 feature. So we're just gonna do this manually a few times here. Yeah, so we're at high 1.1s, low 1.2s, at 5.2 all core, that's expected behavior, and we reached 70C. So we're definitely stressing our CPU harder with R15. You could get soft crashes in Cinebench too. So depending on how hard it crashes, you might just get an error screen that pops up with a Cinebench window, and it will have a bunch of gibberish on it saying an error and a bunch of stuff. And if you start getting that consistently, but your system doesn't hang and you can still close the program and stuff, that's considered a soft crash, which is where it's able to recover. But if you are at all stock speeds and you're starting to get those kinds of crashes, that's a sign that something is wrong with your system. It doesn't necessarily mean the CPU is degraded. If you can verify that your voltages are operating as they're supposed to, that's why I have hardware info open. Because I saw that we're going to high 1.1s, low 1.2s on the voltage, I know that that voltage is correct for stock speeds on a multi-threaded workload based on the way the load line is with this particular motherboard. Some of you might see higher at like 1.3 or something like that. But if you saw like 1.0 or like 0.9, 900 millivolts, then you would be able to say, maybe I'm having an undervoltage problem with that particular motherboard. And I only say that because, again, BuildZoid showed he had a motherboard that was going extreme undervolting at stock speeds. So that was causing a problem. And with the latest BIOS, it went the other direction. So he had an undervolting board, installed the latest BIOS for that particular MSI board, I forget which one it is, and then started hitting 1.6 on the volts. So again, latest microcode, but the motherboard was forcing itself upon the CPU in a very unfriendly manner, causing an offensive situation, which at this point would be the voltage. So that's why I say it's not just the CPU that could be at fault here. Now we could do the same thing with single core. Single core will take longer because it's only one core, but we can then make sure that our voltages and our single core stability is there. That's important. Don't only check multi-threading. Single core is actually a bigger piece of this puzzle than you would think. So single core is getting ready to finish, and I can see core 6 and 7 on the P cores are my preferred cores. They're the only two hitting 6 gigahertz on the single core workload. And they're not doing it at the same time, obviously. They're handing off back and forth. Anyway, about to finish. I would probably run the single core at least 10 times. So moving on, that's R15. You can save the score if you want, sure. R23 is a little more useful in terms of being able to walk away from it because of the fact that we can come over here and we can do a minimum test duration. If that's not showing up, make sure that advanced benchmark is checked. So go to File, Advanced Check or Benchmark, and then you get the minimum test duration. 10 minutes should be plenty. But if you have more time on your hands, you really want to get a good layout of your system's cooling and the voltage and frequencies and how they're working, set it to 30 minutes. And then I'll leave it at 10 right now, but you can set it to 30 minutes and then get your hardware info up, clear your min-maxes, and then hit start on multi-core. It'll take a little longer to run this test because it's designed to take longer to run. But now once again, we can check our voltages in this type of workload, which should be very similar to R15. You can see again, high 1.1s, low 1.2s to mid 1.2s under load. Kind of a little throwback here to when I was doing the AIO testing and I showed you guys just how good the 420 is. No pun intended. But yeah, 420, 62C right now, looping Cinebench R23, 63C, excuse me, 63. Clearly it sucks. All right, so presuming you passed your 10-minute or your 30-minute or your multiple 30 minutes runs without any failures, do the same thing with single core. And I would assume we're gonna see the same type of behavior here. So core 7 and 6 should be our max cores. Yep. 5.985 gigahertz on P7, and then just hand off to P6 for a second. It only hands off to P6 for a second. It's like it has to catch its breath for just a quick moment. Get a few huffs and puffs in there, and then it's like, okay, give it back. So it's just handing off that workload between those two. And then if this passes, we'll move on to the next one. All right, so OCCT, another free software that as long as you're not using it for commercial purposes or you're not using it to say stress test, you're a system integrator and you're using it to stress test systems all day long. That's a commercial use which they want you to pay for it. We're not, and you're not using it in a commercial environment right now. So let's go ahead and use this. So we wanna make sure CPU is checked, not CPU and RAM, not LinPack, not memory, not 3D, not VRAM. You can test VRAM and stuff if you want, or you can test memory and RAM, or CPU and RAM, but just CPU. I have the mode set to variable. Now steady is what I use when I'm doing thermal testing. Variable is what we want because this will allow the workloads to change. They'll be a little more bursty, they'll be a little more consistent, they'll move up and down, they'll hand off certain cores, it'll do 1 core, 4 core, 16 core, whatever. It'll change up the workload and make the CPU have to change gears to keep up with the instructions. Now we can set it to auto, SSE, AVX, AVX2, or 512. I'm just gonna leave it on auto. Let's let it change around a bunch of different instructions because we wanna get as much varying workload on our CPU as we possibly can. Also too, this test, as soon as you hit start, because of the free version, it makes you wait 10 seconds before it'll start. That's a fair trade-off for it being free. It will run until you stop it or until it hits 1 hour. I'm pretty sure the commercial version allows you to change how long it runs for. I think you can go longer than an hour and I think you could set it for less than an hour. But right now, automatic up to 1 hour is all you get. So we can hit start and there it is right there. So it shows how long it's been running. We got this little worm that keeps going around the logo to tell you, hey, things aren't frozen. We can see our CPU, our watts, our volts, and then our current frequencies. So again, we would let this run for a while. So I use the OCC test for lunchtime. So it's now about 40 minutes later, well, 39 minutes and 7 seconds later. It's gone through the test 8 times and it will continue to go until the 1 hour. So far, 0 errors, which is kind of nice to see. Okay, so from here, we're gonna move on to the one sort of gaming test, like I said. And this is only because of the fact that they had said that Heaven did show up some errors for the bad CPUs. So Heaven Benchmark 4.0 Basic Edition, it doesn't really matter what settings you use, to be honest. We just want the process running. Your GPU is gonna make a bunch of noise during this because it is a GPU stress test. But I'm gonna turn off the full screen check because I still wanna be able to see what's happening in hardware info. Tessellation Extreme, Quality Ultra, we're gonna use System Resolution just to put some load. And then we can bring hardware info back up to the front. So look at our volts right now, right? Our volts are all the way up. There goes the GPU fan finally. The volts are all the way up at 1.4 volts. So there's an example of the fact that it does put our CPU is also maxing out the core speeds. It's at 5.7 all core essentially. And then our E cores are all the way up at 4.4. So this is another reason why it's a good test because it actually is using the CPU in the state that's putting the volts high, it's putting the frequency high, which would be another opportunity for any of the issues to sort of show up. So I would let this one run, honestly, for about a solid hour. Let the system get nice and hot, let the system get saturated, and you should not see any crashing. What would typically happen if it crashes though, what that crash sort of looks like, it's gonna be a black screen. You might get a crash to desktop, you might get some sort of a error pop-up, you might get a blue screen, but one of the more common types of crashes for Heaven is gonna be just a black screen. So assuming you don't have any crashes here, we'll go ahead and move on to the driver installer. So for the driver installer, again, unfortunately, this only works for people that have NVIDIA-based graphics cards. But just download the latest driver, put it on your desktop, double click it, hit OK, let it unpack. See, the thing is, we don't need to do necessarily a clean install. We can click the clean install button if we want. It might make the system have to restart, but we're gonna do this like 5 times because this is the part right there when it was unpackaging, and then we're gonna say install the graphics driver, agree and continue. We can just do express, that's fine. And then preparing for install right now, it's gonna basically extract the driver, it's gonna get it ready to be installed. It's gonna go through the process, and then when it's done, we'll be back at the desktop. It'll say driver install complete. It could come back and just show an error. It could come back and just say error installing driver within the driver program. It may throw the error. Or you might get a pop-up on the screen, you might get a Windows error, you might get a blue screen. There's all kinds of problems that show up, or all kinds of ways that the unpacking or the unzipping of the driver can show up when it comes to this particular test. But it's ironic that this is the test that seems to show the most consistent on the more severely degraded CPUs. And it's kind of ironic because I've had people emailing me asking me why their system keeps crashing when installing the NVIDIA driver. Now this was a while ago when the Intel problems were just sort of starting. And I just was assuming like corrupt driver install, maybe bad download, bad GPU potentially. But obviously now it's like looking more like okay, that's the driver. That's normal. It will go off and come back on. It's installing the driver. Anyway, see, there we go. Driver the install has finished. So I would just literally do it again now. And then for good measure, when I'm done here, I would probably DDU this driver and then reinstall it fresh again. But what I started to say is there's a lot of different ways that the error manifests itself. It could be blue screen, could be a white pop-up screen. It could be a shutdown and restart. There's all sorts of things. But it's just ironic that installing something for the GPU was really sort of exposing a problem with the CPU. Just like the out of video memory when launching certain games when it was compiling shaders. Again, the compiling of shaders happens, the CPU is compiling the shaders for the GPU, right? So that's a CPU task, and it's just ironic that it leads to thinking something is wrong with a component that is completely innocent in all of this. So I'm installing the driver one more time, and I know this is a good CPU. I'm gonna probably trial this again with a bad CPU. I'm just waiting for one to arrive, where we can then potentially see what it actually looks like. And the thing is, it's not consistent. It's not a guaranteed, oh, this bad CPU or a bad CPU will crash on this test no matter what. It's just not that way because they don't degrade the same way. The electron migration, it's not a cut and dry, black and white type of thing. It happens weirdly, or different spots of the die. The wafer and the way the migration happens is just not consistent. So because of that, the way that the cores are hit based on the instructions that are being done or performed by the CPU based on what background tasks were run is a million different combinations of things that could be happening to cause the errors. And it's just extremely difficult to actually figure out what those are. But I thought it was important to do this video today to give you guys some empowerment to say, hey, you know what? I want to make sure my CPU is working. You see a lot of comments online saying, oh, every single 13th and 14th gen is broken. That's not true. Every single CPU in the market right now is degrading, but it's degrading at a expected rate. It's like an engine in a car. When your engine is brand new and it's got 5 miles on it, it's certainly gonna operate a little differently than that same engine 200,000 miles from now. And 200,000 miles is gonna have a little bit more rattly noise. It's gonna have a little bit more play. The cylinder walls are a little more worn in. Your piston rings are a little bit worn. You're gonna have a little bit of blow by, maybe some smoke, but it's still running, right? It's not failed on you yet until something breaks. So this is not defensive intel. It's just, I want to put this out there that when people are throwing around the word degradation, every CPU is degrading. But advanced degradation or an accelerated degradation rate is not okay, because that's what we're dealing with here. So Anyway, there we go. Best practices right now might honestly be don't leave your computers on when you're not around. Don't leave them on sitting at your desktop. Don't leave them on sitting in your BIOS. Just now know that there's a timer on many of these CPUs, and any time that your system's on when you're not there is just clicking away life. It's like that movie with Justin Timberlake where you had a time on your arm and that was how long you had left to live. Imagine there's that on your CPU right now. And if you could turn off the system to save some of that time, you should probably do it. Anyway, hope this video's helped. If you guys have a bad CPU, comment down below what you were doing that you could like recreate your scenario for your CPU to fail. Everyone's scenarios are different. Everyone's CPUs and systems have different programs and probably different versions of Windows and all different BIOS and stuff. Say down below what your motherboard is, which CPU you have, and what guaranteed test for you can make your CPU give up the ghost. All right, guys, thanks for watching. Share this video with someone that it will help. And as always, we'll see you in the next one.